Well, today I am checking in with Brian Tilton. Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing great. And you are going to walk us through some of your latest work. I'm a huge fan of your work. I love watercolor. It's one of my favorite mediums to look at and enjoy. I cannot say it's one of my favorite to work in because it's so hard. And so that's one of the things that I love about your work. Obviously, the composition, the color, but the fact that it is watercolor is it's so awesome that you have do such a great job with it.
Well, thank you. Thanks.
You're very welcome.
Um, I've been doing watercolor since basically out of college. I majored in graphic design and painting. I started with oil, which I really miss painting in oil, but with other careers that took over, I kind of switched to watercolor because it was something that I could stop and start, and if I only had 45 minutes to work on it, I worked on it. I tend to work on really heavy paper, like 400 pound. It's almost like a really heavy cardboard. I love it because you can kind of scratch out mistakes like I've recently done on the one I'm working on now. It's like I screwed up somebody's face, so I scratched it all out and started over, and it's really nice because you can do that. My techniques are generally pretty true to watercolor. The true watercolor is known as transparent watercolors. I sometimes lately, for my darkest darks, will be laying it on a little thicker, not quite impasto, but thicker than a traditional watercolor will.
Yeah.
I'm also kind of using gouache to pick out the highlights that are really important in my work because I focus so much on the lights and darks of things and the effects of shadows. So I will use gouache. I used to use sometimes masca, but I don't like the hard edges it creates. I have used it sometimes, but it's not my favorite. So sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. It just depends on the piece.
And for people listening to this who aren't familiar with gouache, it is opaque watercolor, essentially, correct?
It's opaque. It's water soluble. So if I put it on, I don't like it, I can wash it back off again. It's used more for illustrations. Illustrators used to use it more because it was quick and it was easy to dry, and it gave you a little bit more of an opaque finish. It's kind of like the tempera paint you used as a kid. It feels kind of like that, only a little better quality.
Good. I actually just bought a tube of it. I have not opened it. I have not tried it, but many of the people that I've recently met use it. So I have a tube of permanent white gouache that I am going to be pulling out and using it one of these days.
Yeah. I use the white gouache for the highlights, which once again, in true watercolor, you keep the whites of the paper and you paint around it. But the way I like to play with the water and lay it on in broad, even strokes to begin with, it's hard to sometimes keep those smaller white details that make things pop, I think. So I cheat. I'm not a true watercolorist. Oh, well.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why I bought the white gouache, is because I want to start doing watercolor. And I'm always so intimidated by the fact that I have to avoid sections of the paper. It makes me hesitate to even try. So having the ability that I can actually go and make white makes me feel more confident that I want to, engage with watercolor.
Oh, you should try it. It's difficult. Like I said, it's primarily all I've used since college. Other than the first summer out of college, I was playing around with oil still. But once I got a real job to pay the bills, I've used watercolors, which just a couple of years, 10, 20
Okay.
years.
Well, let's take a look at your watercolors in action.
Okay.
I think we have 5 different paintings that you're gonna
Yeah.
share with everyone, and
Yes.
let's go for it.
Okay. I went to Paris for my 60th birthday a couple of years ago, and I love the city. I love Chicago, but the architecture and the art in Paris is just so over the top. You can't walk down the street without tripping over it. So I unknowingly, I came home with 1,500 pictures. I loved the Paris Opera House so much, and I didn't really realize it till I started putting this series together that all of these, most of the paintings that you have are located within very close proximity to the Opera House. I basically did a 2-hour self-guided tour of the Opera House inside, walked outside with my friends, and there it was. All the boulevards, and the light was really interesting. The light in Europe is so much different than here. It was almost like a bright haziness, and I liked it looking down the boulevards. It was really sharp, but yet I could see pinks and purples in it more than I could here. So I just started snapping pictures, and I must have just kind of like, when I took the pictures, must have just stood in one place and rotated, because they're all like within a radius. So once I started looking on my computer, I realized it's like, oh, well, this one is part of this building, and this painting is part of this painting. So it's like, I feel like if I would put them all together, it could almost be one big panoramic of these boulevards.
It sounds like a potential show of your work.
It very well could be, yeah, yeah.
Now, was that the first time you had ever been to Paris?
No, I was there on my 40th birthday, so this was the second time.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to evidently go on my birthdays. I don't know, but it was for my 60th. It was a celebration. I wanted to go, so I met my good friend Terry there, and we had a blast.
Well, nice.
This first painting is the Pantheon in Paris. I didn't use, my older watercolors used to be much more of a detail of a building, and I've kind of gotten away from that. I tend now to do more street scenes, and I never really used to edit or add or subtract from my paintings, but I've been doing a lot more editing and adding and subtracting. This painting of the Pantheon had a big, huge fence that covered the whole back of it. And my initial thought was to leave it in, but the more I got to working on it, I took it out because it just was too distracting. There again, I've added people that weren't there. I took them from my other pictures. I just felt like it needed a little more populated. So I added some people, took out some people. This one I really debated about leaving all the people out. It was just done, it was my most recent finished one. I just kind of wanted to do it to reflect the times. But everybody said, no, I'll put people in. So I kept the people in, and I think it's much better with the people in. So.
What is the size of this?
You know, it's an average sheet of watercolor. I think 29 by 30 is. I don't know. It's the full sheet watercolor paper.
Okay.
It's a standard stock size. I just use that for pretty much everything.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm editing a lot. The next one, there again, it's a Paris street scene. I just love the street scenes. I like the way light reflects from the ground onto the building, creating sometimes what you wouldn't think are reflections, or why is there a shadow there? But it's because there's maybe a building casting a shadow in an odd way that one would never think that was to cast a shadow. I had somebody question me, it's like, why is that shadow there? It's like, well, there was a building across the street, but there wasn't one next to it, and there was a street there, and the street let the sunshine in, but the building cast shadow, and they didn't believe. It was kind of funny. In hindsight, like, he didn't believe that the shadow was there, but it really was. So that last one is another Paris street scene. There again, I just wandered the streets, and this is in the same neighborhood as the Paris Opera House. I'm not exactly sure where, but it's somewhere within that area. This one I really didn't do a lot of editing on. I pretty much just took it as is from the street. Also, I'm trying to create a lot less detail. I love the details. I can get lost in the
Yep.
details. My older paintings were all very detailed, so I'm really trying to edit the detail and make it more of a focus subject on a certain building or people or the balconies or the cars or whatever. I'm also kind of trying to play around with how the bright light sometimes reflects and almost destroys the images. So you might not see a whole complete leg on a person that's caught by the light.
Sure.
I like that with watercolor, that you can kind of play with that. You don't always know what you're going to get when you put down with when you use watercolor, but sometimes you do. Sometimes it's a crapshoot, but the mistakes are sometimes good mistakes.
Yep. The one thing I love about this painting, I love that big line of sunshine at the base of that building off in the distance.
Oh, right. Yeah, I do too.
It's fantastic.
Yeah,
It just frames the whole thing.
Yeah. I love the iron balconies. And I was in Florence a couple of years ago, and I was entranced with all the lights and lanterns and stuff. And in Paris, it was all about the balconies and mansard roofs and everything. So, yeah, I love the wrought iron railings and stuff. It's just a little fixation I have.
Great.
The next one is motorcycles in Paris. This one I did a lot of editing on, where there's the big bunch of motorcycles. It was actually just a big bunch of ugly cars. And the people drive motorcycles in Paris like everywhere. You see men in three-piece suits, women in dresses and heels driving their little motorcycles. And I just wanted to make it feel more like a Paris scene. So I took out the cars and found all these motorcycles from another photo I used and transposed them in. So I think it came out pretty nice, actually. There again, it's the street lights in this one. I love the street lights. I don't know. I've always liked lighting and lamps. So this is just my grown-up version of Paris. It was just all these lanterns and pole lamps. Some of my paintings, I have kind of taken out ugly street lights, modern ones, and replaced them with more appropriate ones, in my opinion, that should fit the area.
That's one of the wonderful things about being a painter, is you can do stuff like that.
Yeah, and I have done that a lot more than I ever used to. It's like, oh, I don't like that woman standing there. She's just not very attractive. Yeah. So I'm going to take her out.
This painting here, this one, it's all about that central light fixture to me.
That and the motorcycles I like. I just really like the motorcycles.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, this other one is another one. One of the main boulevards that goes down from the Paris Opera House. The Paris Opera House is behind me. And this is one of the ones I really kind of started discovering from my previous ones. It's like, oh, I painted that building, but it was on the right-hand corner this time, but now it's on the left-hand corner. So I didn't really realize when I was taking pictures that these were all just so interconnected till I started working on them. I like this one. I like the bicycle. I put the bicycle in because motorcycles and bicycles, there are so many people riding those there, that I just thought a bicycle would be appropriate. But pretty much I didn't do a lot of editing with this one, other than the bicyclist, and I did add the guy walking across the street.
Yep.
So he was an addition.
And again, in this one, those light fixtures, they're really prominent. And
yeah,
in the detail and the shape, I love that.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. Let me see. And then my last one, I think, is the one from Chicago.
Yep.
Yeah. I've done a lot from Chicago. I love Chicago. I like the train tracks, the L tracks. I miss the grand boulevards of what's in Paris. I've been scoping all my Chicago pictures, trying to recapture that feeling. And there is Chicago is a
I don't
modern
know,
city.
Brian. That might be hard. I love Chicago, but it might be hard to capture.
Yeah, it's a gritty city. It's a
Yeah.
modern city, and I like that about it. But I'm just craving that beaux art ornamentation of Paris. But this
Yeah.
one from Chicago, I believe it's down on Wacker, and actually, it's funny. The building in the far distance on the right is the opera house, is the Lyric Opera House.
Oh, okay. Oh,
So
yeah.
that's kind of a little interesting tidbit. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, one thing I will say about, I've lived here in Chicago for about 2 years. And the one thing I would say about the architecture, and I'm certainly not an architecture expert, but there are a lot of very large, very old from an American, a US standpoint, tall office buildings that are very elaborate and very, very ornate. Much more so than I recall that there being in Boston. The buildings are just bigger, and it's not just the modern skyscrapers. There's a lot of buildings, I assume, built like in the 20s or the 30s or something, and they're extremely large, and they are very elaborate and ornate.
Yeah, I just haven't figured. I would like to get back down to Michigan Avenue and the near the Art Institute and take some pictures. But this virus thing has kind of put picture taking on hold. I haven't started working out yet, but I'm looking through my pictures. I did one 10 years ago of there's a clock on Wacker. I believe it's the Jewelry Exchange building. And I'm looking at my pictures, and I always liked that clock. It's not a very well-known clock. The Fields clock takes precedence over this clock, but it has Father Time on it. It's really an interesting clock. So I'm thinking I might redo that, but in how my paintings are looser now. This one was when everything was really very tight and not flowing, and I tried to get in every detail.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to try this painting again to see if I can make it up to what I'm doing today. It has this Jewelry Exchange clock in it, and the Marina Towers in the back, and so which is an icon of Chicago. So it'd be kind of interesting to have that. I like the modern versus old in it, which is kind of fun.
Okay, sounds interesting. So we'll definitely, I'll have to have you back when you have this new batch. You can share
see if I can make it better than the previous one. Or different, at least.
Or different, yeah. I mean, that's one of the great things about being a painter is you're always challenged, and you're always growing, and it never ends. You'll never really master it.
No, exactly. It's like, it makes me kind of mad at myself that I look at this one I did 10 years ago. It's like, oh my God, how could I ever have done that?
Yeah.
But it seems like I should have gotten to the point where I am now sooner than in 10 years, but I don't make a living off my art, unfortunately. So I still have to work outside my studio, which is in my dining room, which is why I don't do oils.
Right. Well, Brian, where can people learn more about your artwork and see your artwork?
Basically, right now, it's on Facebook. I've sold an surprisingly lot from Facebook, from friends and acquaintances, and who would have thought? I also have a shop on Etsy, ETSY, and my shop name is Brian Tilton, no space.
So how do you spell that?
Tilton.
Okay.
Brian, BRIAN TILTON. It's amazing. It's amazing during this quarantine, the amount of the amount of people visiting my shops have been. I've had 8 this week, which is 8 in one day. That's been the most in any day so far. So it's been a boom. I haven't sold anything, but people are definitely finding it where they hadn't before.
Oh, good. So that's your Etsy, and then your Facebook page. What is your name on Facebook?
Just my name again, Brian Tilton.
Okay.
Yeah, look me up.
All right, sounds good. Well, it was great checking in with you, and thank you for walking us all through those amazing paintings. They were
Well, thank you.
incredible. You're
Thanks
very
for
welcome.
having me. This was fun.
All right, cool.